Okay. Hello, everyone. I believe that we are live now. Um, so I would like to welcome you all the 12th episode of Planet Earthly's webinar series. And this episode is going to be focused on identifying high-quality nature-based projects, and in particular on how to leverage digital MRV tools to really go deeper into project due diligence and identify the best nature-based solutions to invest in. So this will be an introductory webinar aimed at both more experienced but also beginners in the sector. And we will have time after the panel discussion for questions from the audience, which you can send us through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will just wait a couple more minutes for everyone to join, and then we will kick off. Okay. So for those who do not know the work that we are doing at Earthly and the topic of this webinar, why is it important to really leverage digital MRV to improve screening of project quality? Well, because nature-based solutions, which are solutions that use nature to deliver both social and environmental benefit to mitigate climate change, but also adapt to it and deliver societal and biodiversity co-benefits, have a huge potential, estimated to around 30% of climate mitigation targets, but they only receive a very small amount of climate finance, mitigation finance, around 3%. And Earthly's goal is to really close that finance gap by bringing confidence and integrity and transparency to the voluntary carbon market. So why is it important to bring integrity to this market? Because since it was developed outside of policy and in a very self-regulatory manner, the early voluntary carbon market was, to some extent, Wild West, in which anyone could develop projects, sell them, and advertise the mitigation that they were achieving through these projects. But the quality was varying really immensely, from projects that were actually delivering carbon mitigation to projects that were not only massively overestimating their carbon benefits, but they were also having a net negative impact on either biodiversity, for instance, through planting eucalyptus monoculture plantations in place of places like Brazil. And on the other hand, maybe they were having negative impacts on communities, either through land grabs or maybe not sharing the benefits that were coming from the projects, or maybe by closing off some areas which traditionally were accessible to indigenous communities. And all of a sudden, for reasons that weren't properly explained to the local communities, they were closed off for use under carbon programs internationally. So this obviously brought tension in the market between those who wanted to invest in nature to do some good and those who really were shying away from this method of investing in nature because of the risks, also reputational risks for companies associated with these projects of low quality. And that's where Earthly came in, to basically screen the whole market for really the 5% best nature-based solutions worldwide. And in order to do this, we partnered with our guests tonight in order to make our assessment even more powerful. I will start by introducing our panelists very briefly. We will go then in more detail into each one of them, and then go in more detail into Earthly's assessment, to which contribute all the technologies provided by our guests here. So let's start with Dr. Rishi Das, the nature-based solution methodologies lead at B0 Carbon, which is our partner for external validation, basically, and third-party perspectives on the carbon overissuance risk of our project portfolio. Rishi, if you want to salute the audience briefly, then we will have more time to go in more detail in your presentation.
Hi, everyone. Hello from B0.
Then we have Adam Smith from Vertex AI in Google, who's the Climate Action Challenge lead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Smith, representing Google and Vertex AI today. Hi.
And finally, Sam Fleming, who is the co-founder of Earthblocks, which is our partner in remote sensing monitoring.
Hi there, everybody. It's great to join you from Earthblocks today.
Fantastic. So I briefly mentioned earlier that Earthly's main goal as a company was to bring confidence, transparency, and to select the best projects worldwide. How do we do it? Through the framework that you see in front of you now, which was created by Earthly to really assess carbon, social, and biodiversity quality indicators in a holistic manner. So this is the top level of our assessment, so the highest level, which is then broken down. Each of the bars you see for additionality, baseline, permanence, but also stakeholder engagement, etc. Each of these correspond to roughly 5 to 10 specific indicators that are scored individually by our research team for both integrity, so how well the project is addressing these, but also the quality of data that we have to make that assertion and give that score. So for instance, if the project is simply claiming to be having educational impacts, they will receive a much lower score than if they provide quantitative evidence and maybe third-party validation. So basically this graph you see in front of you is the result of more than 106 indicators of quality that are double scored in this way I just mentioned. And we have a minimum requirement for each of these 106 indicators, which lies actually above the current market average. And that is testified by what you can see on the top right of the screen. That is that 92%, and actually this figure is evolving over time, luckily, because of the quality initiatives in the carbon market, but is roughly stable at that quantity, do not meet our minimum standard. So we have screened over 300 nature-based solution projects, and of these, only like 8% have passed our assessment. And that means only passing our minimum standard, not just that, like maybe some of this 8% wasn't high quality enough to actually be sold on the marketplace. How do we score this? How do we score this 106 indicator? Each of these uses a combination of these data elements. So we have a combination of basically project documents screening, which we use, which we collaborate with Vertex AI on. Basically, we feed the project documents and any documentation available online into a RAG model, which outputs helps us extract more effectively certain information. But then every project document is also screened by researchers to verify the findings and go deeper into that analysis. Then we have a legal due diligence with our third parties. We work on physical risk, statistical modeling, work with biodiversity MRV providers to get richer data on the biodiversity of the project. We do our internal geospatial analysis, thanks to Earthblocks and other parties that we are going to present later. And finally, we get a third-party perspective on that is completely independent of our own geospatial analysis from a third party like B0 or Renosta. And so without further ado, let's start with Adam Smith, actually, from Vertex AI, who will who will share more about the work we've been doing together.
Yeah, I was glad you picked me first, Giacomo, actually, because it looked like we were at the bottom of the stack there. So hopefully the narrative as you're going through that will will make sense. But being at the bottom doesn't necessarily mean the least valuable, right? So I don't have any slides to share, but I'll kind of spend 2 or 3 minutes just talking you through the kind of journey that we've had with Earthly. So I think it's good actually just to set a bit of background to kind of like how we're involved with Earthly. So it may come as a surprise actually to you that actually my day job, if you like, is actually working on the commercial side with YouTube. But we've been lucky enough to be allowed to spend a proportion of our time to work in a program which is called Google Startups for Sustainable Development. And essentially, it's an internal kind of pro bono program that allows Googlers to work with climate tech startups such as Earthly to kind of propel their businesses forward using all the great resources that we have within Google. So that's kind of background and how I've been working with them. And actually, Earthly were picked at the beginning of the year to work on our inaugural Climate Action Challenge. So what does that actually mean? So I think the intention set out with the Climate Action Challenge was actually like, can we dedicate 3 to 4, maybe 5 Googlers time to really focus in on one specific issue that our tech startup has, Earthly being in this case. So I acted as the program manager. We also had 2 data scientists, and we also had an engineer within that. And it was presented to us by Giacomo and Ollie and the guys down at Earthly that actually this project assessment, which Giacomo just kind of talked about there, is very labor intensive. You mentioned before it being slightly Wild West as well. So being able to go through all this data with a fine tooth comb and actually be able to fact check that data is extremely important to Earthly's business. And one of the main, kind of issues, I guess, and what would propel Earthly's business forward is how can we create efficiency and also how can we improve accuracy on our nature-based project assessment. So this is kind of where we came in. It was very quickly realized that we could use Vertex AI to assist in this task. Now, for those that aren't familiar, Vertex AI is actually a machine learning tool that sits within the Google Cloud stack. It uses Gemini, which is our kind of foundational AI model, which you might all be a bit more familiar with, I guess, kind of Google's AI tool. And essentially, it gives massive amounts of customization to partners and clients within that in order for partners and clients to essentially create their own Gen AI tools. So what we used is this concept called RAG, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation. Bit of a tongue twister, but there you go. Try and remember that one. Hopefully we'll test you at the end. And essentially what that means is you're able to completely customize how you want the tool to find information for you. So I'll give you an example, like an LLM model, such as ChatGPT, for example, is based on a set data set. So you type in what you need, and then it looks back at, say, the internet from 2022, and then out pops your very, clever answer. What a RAG solution enables a partner to do, or a business, is actually get that kind of real-time information. So you're able to surf the internet, in real time, get information, and importantly, and this is where Earthly really needed this assistance as well, you can program it in order to go to reputable institutions and NGOs to then fact check that information is actually accurate. So if you like, you mentioned the eucalyptus tree example before, they could give a claim of, we're going to reducing carbon by XYZ. They could train this RAG model to actually go out and say, is this actually true? And then come back with an answer based on the questions. Now, my final point, I guess, is that the devil's really in the detail with this. It all really depends on how you train these models. So the work we've done together with Earthly has been really important, using these data scientists in order to, use the questions that Earthly needed answered, and then to go out and, find these questions, answers to these questions on the internet. So in conclusion, really, for that, we're at the first stages of this. I think the Earthly team would agree. We've just finished a kind of MVP model on that within Vertex AI, which we're really excited by, and that is being passed over to our kind of the guys on the day job who work in the Google Cloud team to kind of take that further and refine that model even further. So that's a short summary of how we've been working with Earthly and the exciting opportunities that Vertex AI has been giving.
Thank you very much. You've actually answered already the first question that I had for you, which was about the differences between Vertex AI and other LLMs such as ChatGPT, which I believe the audience is more
I can go into more about that if you need to. So I'll try to.
I think we can actually sort of answer anything else you have on that through the next two questions, which are, what are the limitations, obviously, of these RAG models, and in particular Vertex AI and Gemini, and how do you see Google's RAG products basically evolving over time to address these challenges and address the sort of bottlenecks that AI is facing in solving these issues for business? Because I see now a lot of excitement and hype about AI, but obviously it's great to have you here also to manage this expectation and tell us really how will it deliver value today and in the future.
Yeah, sure. It's quite a big question, Giacomo. So I'll try and distill it a bit down. So I guess if I start with, what are the advantages of using, Vertex AI? And actually, I know you posed, what's the advantages necessarily against, say, I work at Google, so I'm slightly biased, but, to the competitors such as ChatGPT, it's not a real apples to apples question there. So really the real use case for ChatGPT is really Gemini. So Gemini is our kind of foundational AI model, the traditional LLM, which we're all kind of fairly familiar with. Vertex AI is a layer on top of that, if you like, which is the machine learning tool that uses Gemini to help power that AI model. Now, the advantages that you get from using Vertex AI, I mentioned at the beginning that customization is really the big one. So this really, enables any business really that's a cloud customer to go in and create essentially their own Gen AI tool. So whatever that might be, you're obviously focused on nature project assessment. So that would be, how you would use it. But that customization is really in that. A layer on top of that, actually, which is something I know that you guys have been using as well, is this Gen AI Studio that sits within Vertex AI. Now, I don't know, how skilled everyone is on the call, but I'm assuming that most of us don't have computer science degrees in machine learning and AI. So this is super important because it does enable the layman, if you like, or people that don't necessarily have that experience, in order to go in and simply create their own versions of these models. So that's super, a super plus, if you like. The other one, which we'll kind of touch on, is maybe go to some of the limitations, I guess, in the future. But actually, this concept of multimodal capabilities, and I don't know how familiar people are with this. So I'll pose this, that I imagine most people on the call are very used to going into ChatGPT. You should use Gemini to go in, ask a question, and out pops your answer. Where should I go on holiday? Where's good this year? And then we're kind of more familiar with that. Multimodal is actually using different types of media, so video, images, audio, in order to go and find your answers based on that. So that actually opens up a huge wealth of data and information, as you could imagine. And that's something that we have experience in order to kind of increase the AI capability there. Now, the last bit which I'll mention and I'll kind of introduce is this idea of tokens. Now, if anyone had watched the Google I/O conference a few months ago, this was probably introduced by our DeepMind team. But a token is essentially like a piece of data that the AI tool uses in order to analyze what you're asking. So the amount of tokens you can analyze, theoretically, that means how the tool becomes more accurate. So Google announced in later this year for a Gemini Pro that have the ability to look through about 2 million tokens. So it sounds like a lot of data. To put that in context, I think the ChatGPT equivalent Pro now is about 128,000 tokens. So, it gives you a sense there. Now, why is that important? One, it kind of increases the accuracy, which is very important for Earthly, right? And for you guys, because you need to get you need to be able to fact check that what these companies are saying are accurate. But also, which I think is quite clever as well, it remembers the conversation that you're having as well. So it has this like contextual understanding. So you don't need to, you can kind of create your own persona, if you like, and it kind of remembers that. Limitations, I think that was one of them. I think a big one, it's not free. Like it's a Google Cloud product. You got to pay for it, I'm afraid. But that's part of it. And also with all these AI tools, they're really in their infancy at the moment. So, we are developing betas, they are developing, but we're all learning and we're all developing this with our clients.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jack.
Yeah. And that's great because, as you said, it's the fact that you can personalize the data that feeds into the LLMs and basically allows Earthly to use to only extract information from the data sources it considers reputable, and to really clean it from all that background noise which could come from the web or like the training data which was used to train the LLM. And the use case for Earthly at this stage would be to democratize and expand our services outside of our portfolio, because currently we only provide rich data for the projects we endorse, but it would be great to expand that further to the hundreds of projects we've been rating. And so that's one, the scaling of the access to our services, but also on the other hand, for the researchers to be able to access and screen a lot more data for the same project.
I think that was
so. Thank you very much.
Sorry. I was just going to add one more point, and like that, I think that was really important as well. That the main reason for doing the Climate Action Challenge for us is to help scale your business, and so anything that we can do that frees up your time in order to do more stuff is great, and that's essentially the aim of what we were trying to do.
Thank you very much. Also, Google was one of the first investors in Earthly, so that's also a relationship that dates away a long way. So thank you, Adam. Let's go next to Sam from if you want to share the slides, please.
Yes, good afternoon. I say good afternoon, everybody, but of course, I can imagine people are spread all around the world. So if you give me just a second, I will share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that now, okay? So as I said earlier, so my name's Sam Fleming. I am one of the co-founders of Earthblocks. To give you just a bit of a flavor of my background, so before I set up Earthblocks with my colleagues, I used to basically work as a consultant running satellite mapping projects all over the world. And my particular focus was on kind of forest conservation, forest carbon, sustainable resource use. So the kind of nature-based solutions space and geospatial analysis has been my area of focus all along. So I mean, I want to say thank you to Earthly for inviting me along. And so you asked me to talk just a little bit about some of the kind of challenges of identifying high quality nature-based solutions projects. So actually earlier in the year, I wrote a report that highlighted kind of 4 due diligence challenges with a particular focus on how geospatial data can help. And I think if we think at the macro level, a lot of these challenges stem from the move that we're seeing to bring kind of due diligence in-house. And I think, Giacomo, the work that you were showing earlier is a really good example of that. And as we saw, so geospatial data is a really key component for that. But I think once you start to do that, I think that there's kind of four key challenges that I see. So one is around safeguarding. So obviously there was a lot of let's say noise in the media last year about the quality of forest carbon projects, and so I think part of the move to bring a certain degree of kind of due diligence and screening in-house is about taking responsibility for that and ensuring the quality of a project rather than just outsourcing it, and sort of complementing the data that you get from, say my colleague there, Rishi, with some of the data that you can get from, for example, us, to help you get that overall view. But linked to that is the transparency piece. So actually being able to verify the claims that project developers are making and doing that independently, I think, is really important for helping to understand the actual quality of a project. And ultimately that helps you to build trust and credibility with your partners, stakeholders, and ultimately your customers. But also I think geospatial data is also a really good way to improve communication as well. If you can see the trees growing on the satellite imagery, you're going to be much more confident that your project is doing something than if you can see them not growing. And obviously that's a big simplification, but I think you get the point in that kind of maps and pictures say a lot. And I think so the next point there I've kind of put is scaling, and really what I mean by that is scaling up the due diligence. So we're certainly seeing these kind of multi-step screening kind of processes that ultimately are helping to improve your ability to kind of identify high quality projects, but also I think doing that in an efficient way. So as we heard from Adam, a lot of that kind of process is really is really quite time intensive, and so one of the ways that we kind of contribute there is help make sure that's really efficient, and making sure that we can utilize the commercial teams as well as, say, the kind of GIS type teams. And I think all of this leads to kind of differentiation, because it lets you adopt a kind of stricter due diligence process and set your own bar for both what quality means and also like how high is high enough. But it also allows you to specialize in certain types of projects. So how does Earthbox kind of fit into that? So on the one hand, we bring together the most authoritative data into one place. Often that's about bringing the best of publicly available data, but also helping our customers to leverage the best commercial data sets that are out there. And certainly we saw a few of those on Giacomo's slide earlier. And really it's about making sure that you've got those independent data sources to help you assess that quality. Then at Earthbox, we have essentially packaged solutions that have been built by our team of experts. I'm by no means the only person in the Earthbox team that comes from this kind of background of using geospatial and satellite mapping to help with these kind of questions. But I think because we work across the market, also we're able to kind of bring together the best of how people do different things. But more often than not, that's just a starting point. And that's kind of links back to what I was saying about differentiation. And so we obviously heard from Giacomo a bit about Earthly's process. And I think it's a really, really good example there of where you've designed your own kind of due diligence and scoring process. And we are one part of that, and we are one of those kind of data feeds. And so really kind of using those packages that have been built to accelerate and then begin to customize and tailor to develop your own due diligence process. But I think perhaps one of the things that I certainly feel sets us apart from a lot of other things is about how you then operationalize that. So this kind of using Earthbox to build kind of repeatable workflows. Those are essentially developed by technical experts, whether in collaboration with us or completely internally. And essentially that creates standardized analyses that can be used across projects, across geographies. But ultimately that's actually used by commercial teams more often than not, doing a kind of initial screening stage for prioritization, which then frees up the GIS team to do more in-depth analysis on projects that actually you've already got a good idea have got a relatively high level of standards. And so kind of if you can cut out a lot of that work from all of the projects you assess and really allow you to focus. but also doing that at a global scale. And I think that kind of standardization process also helps to support kind of ongoing monitoring, reporting, verification. So it's not just about due diligence. It's also about helping you to continually monitor and make sure that quality is maintained throughout the lifetime of a project. And so I just wanted to kind of end on this particular slide here. And so these are quotes from some of our customers. So cutting analysis time down from 80 days to 8 minutes. So that's one of that's specifically related to that piece around non-permanence and looking at kind of environmental climate kind of hazards and the risk that might put on permanence. But also to build transparency, building trust and credibility whilst staying in control with that kind of full customization through using Earthblocks. So yeah, I don't want to take up too much more of the time. So
thank you, Sam. So yeah, it's great what you said there around repeatability, but also personalization, because that's exactly what made us come to you, because you do strike a great balance between that repeatability, so that provides, you know, comparability across projects and geographies by using the same workflows. But at the same time, where there are situations where, say, there's a better data set in some area than another, or if there's, say, a peculiarity of one project type versus another, you can always adapt and tailor your code effectively to that specific context. So that's great. And I must really say that the level of detail and technical expertise of the support from your team was also very precious for Earthly. And yeah, I really liked what you said about the responsibility, because obviously the way we are doing it at Earthly is that we do the analysis internally first, then we use your workflows, and then we go to a third parties like B0, who will be presenting later, to get a completely independent, unbiased third perspective on the carbon risk of a project. So that's really our main goal, to be objective and take responsibility over the choices we make in the market. And what I would like to ask you, it's you quickly went through a slide earlier, which was showing all the sort of data sets or like sort of analysis you could make. And I was wondering if you could go a little deeper in that and share with our audience what kind of carbon and biodiversity analysis are today possible with a decent degree of confidence through your platform. So like biomass estimate, like all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think I'm going to start by saying, so Earthblocks is built as a kind of flexible and scalable platform. So ultimately, with the right type of data, we can support almost any type of kind of spatial analysis. And I think if we think back to those kind of packages I was talking about, sort of built by our team of experts. So we have packages specifically aimed at kind of ARR, Red Plus, Blue Carbon, nature credits and biodiversity as kind of specific examples. And as I said, more often than not, that's an acceleration into kind of and used as a starting point. So customizing from then on. And ultimately, I think that means you're not getting a black box. You're actually getting something that gives you the full transparency. And ultimately, for many of our customers, they're audited as well. And so it's not just about what decision you made, it's what data and what process you used to get to that, to get the insight that you then make a decision on. And I think that's really
that was going to be my next question. So
and so, but then I think, but that flexibility means we can also be reactive. So those packages are updated, so we can align with kind of emerging requirements. So, for example, the Vera's dynamic baselining for afforestation, reforestation, and generation. So we have specific workflows that align with that, in particular, helping to find or check the kind of control plots. But equally, so on the biodiversity side, the nature credit, so Vera still up for public consultation, is the SD Vista kind of methodology, but we actually already have a package that kind of supports that work. And we actually have customers who are engaging with Vera to be some of those early kind of nature credits, and we're a part of that. But then I guess more broadly within Earthblocks, thinking about compliance, we do a lot of work with corporates and financial services on things like TNFD, so nature-related disclosures. And again, it's a highly evolving market, and so this ability to kind of react quickly and is really important, and that's where that flexibility comes in.
Yeah, and it's great to have all those data sets like interacting in the same platform rather than looking at them in silos, basically. Exactly. And so the next question is basically, can you explain a bit more practically what is a workflow? Because maybe this is terminology that we understand, but it would be great to
Oops, I don't know if
and then there's the
I don't know if it
did I break off for a second?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I was saying
share my screen again briefly. So this is one of the slides that we kind of skip through quite quickly. So you can kind of see here on the right hand side, we've got essentially a collection of different blocks, and ultimately these are the blocks that make up a workflow. And so Earthblocks is a no code solution, but each block here basically represents a step in the process. So you can see exactly which data you're using and all of the steps that data is going through to be processed. Here there's 3 different ones, so there's 3 different data sets being brought together to overall give you some kind of analysis that's been designed. So when we talk about workflows, this is kind of what we mean. So
yeah, and I think one great thing that made us appreciate this partnership is the fact that you often use like peer-reviewed calculation and flows rather than so there's a transparency around every step, like the data sets but also the calculations, and so we work in a very sort of peer-reviewed manner at every step, which is great. So we will address the question from the audience towards the end, but for now I would like to connect what we're doing with the Earthblocks with the partnership we have with B0. We are now one of the oldest clients of B0. Actually, we've been partnering for 3 years since the very start of Earthly, because of course it's great to always get third-party perspectives on the same project, since nature-based solutions are quite complex, and often something that is picked up by Earthly is maybe not picked up by someone else, and vice versa. So I would like to introduce you to Rishi from B0.
Hi again. I'm going to pull my slides up and just provide a bit of an introduction into B0 and what specifically we do, and then I'll get into some of the questions that we're trying to get into today. So hopefully you can see those slides. So B0 is a global carbon ratings agency, and we like to say that we can assess the quality of carbon credits for any project at any stage anywhere in the world. I think what makes us a little bit unique is as a ratings agency, we are essentially independent. So if you think of the design of the carbon markets, the original design was, there was the standards bodies that issued the credits and maintained the methodologies, the project developers, and then the auditors. And then sort of upstream and downstream, there were, investors and projects and buyers. But as several other people have referenced, there have obviously been a range of quality and issues with carbon credits where they really were not delivering sort of the promised, carbon or climate benefit that they were supposed to. And so that really led to, I think, the rise of ratings agencies as sort of a fourth pillar, if you will, in the carbon markets. I think what the important role of carbon ratings is really to provide a truly independent, because if you think about the other three pillars, everybody has a bit of a stake in credits that are issued on the market. And so B0 is this one of the independent carbon ratings agencies that provides this independent assessment. And this is just a slide to show what our scale looks like. So it's an 8-point scale. Some of the things that we say about carbon credits is that quality falls along a spectrum, similar to what Giacomo was saying earlier. And the B0 carbon rating is our opinion of the likelihood that a single credit that you purchase, no matter what the type of credit that it is, gives you a ton of CO2e either avoided or removed. The B0 rating is unique in the sense that we consider it a fungible metric of risk. So the risk is, what's the risk that you're not getting that ton? And the fungibility relates to comparing all the different types of credits. So if you think about nature-based, non-nature-based, removals, avoidance, the B0 carbon rating is designed to be able to really compare all of these different types of products that are out there. And we think that's really important for carbon markets to become more effective and to really deliver, what they were designed to do. Some of the things that differentiate us as a carbon ratings agency, we have, similar to some of the members here on the call, we have our own in-house experts. We have a team of almost 80 people now, many of whom are sector experts and academic experts who now work with B0 to essentially lead to use sort of an analyst-led approach to deliver these ratings. We are also transparent, so we publish all of our methodologies and describe at least what data we're using to come up with our ratings. And then finally, what I alluded to earlier, that we are independent. So we are an independent agency, so we don't provide any sort of advisory. We don't introduce buyers as sellers. We're not trying to curate and sort of say, people should or should not buy credits. We don't do any sort of advisory. Our ratings model really has three primary components to it, and I think this is similar to what Giacomo described earlier. I think our rating, the B0 carbon rating, is really about the likelihood of you getting a carbon benefit. So all of the other co-benefits and the safeguards are sort of additional pieces of due diligence that we have started to do, but the core rating is really about the carbon efficacy. And so the three pillars are additionality, the carbon accounting, and the non-permanence risk. I'll just, one of the questions that sort of came up was, what do we see as the challenge of finding high quality and high integrity carbon credits? I think, some of the things that Sam mentioned, I think also are true in our opinion. I think transparency in particular is particularly challenging because these carbon projects, especially nature-based projects, are very complex. The context of the project matters quite a bit. So depending on the project type and where it's located, when it was implemented, it is a very dynamic thing. That risk that we try to assess in a carbon rating is dynamic over time. Nature-based projects have unique risks, and I think if you think about that sort of wagon wheel that Giacomo presented earlier, they're often trade-offs. So, you can do certain types of projects will do some things really well, but will raise the risk to certain other factors. He provided an example of, planting eucalyptus trees or displacing people in the course of implementing a project. And so What we try to do, what B0 really provides that I think is important in carbon markets is we provide, this metric that is the sort of universally understandable, that language of risk, so that people can compare carbon credits. And then I think the other thing is just that these risks change over time. So what B0 provides as a service is this continuous monitoring of projects. So we will frequently put projects that we have rated on Ratings Watch, because we will either find media coverage or changes such as, fires occurring in projects or projects changing their boundaries. We will do this, and I say this. I used to work at Vera, and I actually used to run their digital MRV program. And I used to work within their methodologies team. And having gone from working with a standards body to now a ratings agency, I can say from firsthand experience that the frequency and the speed with which a ratings agency can sort of alert buyers and the market to the evolving nature of risk is something that I think really didn't exist before and really wasn't even possible in many ways. A lot of the tools that Sam and others were alluding to, the ability to use remote sensing and geospatial data and to be able to monitor projects globally really has evolved rapidly, and so some of these tools are critical. So I'll stop sharing my slides. I'll pause there, and we can get into some of the other questions.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Actually, one of the questions from the audience earlier was precisely what happens if a project meets quality standard at first, but then deteriorates over time. And without even reading the question, both Sam and Rishi, you addressed that question spontaneously because it's such a central part of our day-to-day experience that things in these complex environments change over time. And it actually touches on what Adam was talking about, especially because one of the main limitations that we face, and I'm sure that Rishi agrees as well, is the time that it was required to continuously update these assessments. And so RAG and LLM models provided by Vertex AI are helping us to make these assessments more efficient and therefore to be able to increase the frequency of the monitoring and to be more agile in responding to changes on the ground. To maybe complete the answer to that question, I wanted to add that Earthly has a process we follow for every project that initially passes an assessment, but then underperforms. And it starts with an engagement process where we share feedback. I'll show it more in detail later. And then if the project doesn't respond effectively, it's taken down to the platform and all the investors are notified. But we haven't currently had projects significantly underperforming in our portfolio, so that's good news. But yeah, all of the projects that you see on Earthly's marketplace with the public scores, they will have been scored within the past few months in the current form. So one more question to Rishi. Actually, in Sam's presentation, we touched upon the possibility of using various data sets according to the location and the project type. So what is really the data backbone of B0? And so what sort of data are your ratings based on? I guess it's a combination of remote sensing as well and remote and desk-based. And within that, what makes of it is in-house, proprietary data set, like commercially available data sets or publicly available data sets. And yeah, so what are the sources in a sense of your assessment?
So we rely, I'd say there's sort of maybe 3 buckets of data, and I think we, similar to what you guys are doing and what people who are buying credits or investing in credits as they're doing their due diligence, there are bound to be some overlaps. But one, if we're talking about projects that have already issued credits, one is just the project's own documentation. And over there, we will use what the project has provided, what methodology it's using, so that's one bucket of data that we take into account. We will often have to, use our own in-house geospatial capability to construct things like leakage belts, reference regions. We do all of that in-house and put it on our platform, which is something that isn't provided by the registries. It may be in project documentation. Sometimes we have to reach out to project developers or standards bodies to get that information. So one is just the project's own documentation. The other is independent data sets. So, we will use, for something like additionality, we will take a top-down view of the sector and the country, look at financial data, the policy environment, the regulatory environment, and do our own sort of, aside from what the project has provided, and the tests that it has applied to, say, demonstrate additionality, we will do our own sort of assessment of, I had a slide up earlier of common practice. So for afforestation projects, we look around and see how common are plantations. For that, we need to pull in, remote sensing data. So we have to sometimes do our own land cover classification to decide, what is a commercial plantation, what's officially reported. So there are multiple data sets, from this sort of bottom-up view that we need to pull together. We also, and then, finally, there's sort of like the bespoke, work that we do in-house where we're using public data sets. So a good example in nature-based projects is, for the project's carbon accounting, we will, look at the way that they have, like what their inventory design was, what sort of methodologies they used to come up with their carbon estimates, and how they did all of their carbon accounting. We will then compare that to both remotely sensed data sets. We have, this network of biomass plots that are on the ground where we partner with research institutions. So we use a combination of remotely sensed, modeled on the ground, and then, independent research, like peer-reviewed research, for a particular context. And we'll try to assess the quality of, the carbon accounting, for example.
Yeah.
That's one example. There are many others. There's, fire data, there's natural hazard data, climate data, similar to what, Sam and what Earthly is already using, that we pull together. But those are sort of roughly like the 3 different categories that we use.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your answer. I'm aware of the short time remaining, and I want to address all of the questions from the audience. So I wanted to ask a question directed to you, actually, Rishi, from the audience. If you can answer as quickly as possible to the question, when will Plan Vivo projects be rated by B0?
We actually already have rated Plan Vivo projects. I believe most of the ones that we have done are in afforestation, reforestation. I think we've also even done like an avoided deforestation project, but we've rated some, and we are looking to expand that.
Yeah. And on that, I can reply also that Earthly in particular is really fond of Plan Vivo projects. We have a lot in our portfolio, and so we have rated quite a lot of Plan Vivo projects. And if you want to see the ratings, you can see them on our public platform online on earthly.org. And yes, so the next question is on baselines. And actually, it's maybe a question I can take because it's asking whether we use the start date as a baseline, like, and how we address situations where biodiversity work has been doing sooner than day one, and if there's a way to measure that. So I think Rishi will agree with me in saying that the date of when you take the baseline generally is when the carbon project has started, and that's because internationally we have reached a consensus that it's important for carbon projects to be additional, meaning that carbon finance is crucial and essential for the project to happen as it is. So a project that was already successfully doing biodiversity restoration or reforestation or whatever before the project start date, that means that they have other sources of funding that compete against carbon finance, and therefore in those cases there would be little justification for the need of carbon credits. So that's generally how we address it. Obviously, this creates a bias in the market in favor of late movers, which is slightly contradictory, and it's been really at the center of a lot of international discussions. And there's some frameworks that are changing this. For instance, the Italian national registry, it's not taking day one as baseline, but it's just taking an uplift relative to the common practice. So that's another approach you could take. But obviously, when you're talking about offsetting, it's really crucial that you know that your finance is doing additional work to what would happen before. There's another question. I don't know if Rishi wants to add something, but I saw he was nodding, so I believe I can go to the next question. Another question from the audience is, what time frame do you feel is best when assessing nature-based solution permanence risk, to Rishi? So I guess this refers to 30 years permanence period or 100 years permanence period, as the UN suggests.
Yeah, so in the B0 rating, basically we use what the project's commitment period is to rate its non-permanence risk. So we don't have like a default view that, you know, it has to be 100 years or 1,000 years in order for, you know, we don't differentiate the non-permanence risk on that basis. And the reason that we do that is, you know, we think that it's, you know, we think of the carbon credit as sort of a contractual obligation to deliver that, you know, that ton of carbon. And we take into account the commitment period along which, you know, it needs to be delivered. So, you know, for nature-based projects, if they have a 40-year crediting period, you know, we take into account, you know, what the insurance mechanism, like the buffer pool contributions are, whether we think those are appropriate. You know, we take into account whether there is sort of future risk of, you know, increased fire, increased drought, and what that might mean. But we default to using the commitment period that the project uses.
Thank you, Rishi. And I would like to add on that, so B0 and Earthly are partnering mostly on the carbon analysis, which is what B0 is strongest at. But obviously, Earthly's assessment goes beyond that in looking in a lot of detail also at the social and biodiversity components of nature-based projects, which obviously have a bilateral relationship with permanence. So say a well-designed biodiversity strategy and community engagement will positively impact permanence, and vice versa, like a poorly designed, say, carbon accounting methodology will decrease the permanence of the project and therefore damage the community relationships. So I wanted to share maybe a little bit more in detail sort of how that happens in practice. So for instance, here we have a case of a project which has a strong carbon and strong people component, as you can see here. And this actually is a great example of what Rishi was saying, of sometimes there are trade-offs between what projects address in terms of quality. Well, we can see that there's a weaker biodiversity engagement of the project. And for the biodiversity is really low, expect permanence to be affected negatively by that, because it will be slower in risks such as pest or fire in the area. And I'm not sure if you heard that last bit, or was it interrupted?
I think you just broke up for a minute.
So I was just saying that here you might expect poor governance regarding biodiversity to negatively affect permanence, because say if there's some pest going around the project which you weren't expecting at the beginning, a more biodiverse and MRV rich project will be able to address that more in a more agile manner. And so in the way Earthly addresses permanence is not just a matter of how long the permanence period is, but also how it interacts with social and biodiversity components. And I would like to go to the last question from the audience, although we are getting quite a lot, which is great. A question by Ken Lee from Earth Security is asking sort of how do we address the issue of accessibility to carbon markets, and how we are helping earlier stage projects accessing finance. Because for context, a lot of the carbon projects in the world have been led by large corporations, and that has both had a negative effect in terms of accessibility and inclusivity of the carbon market, but also on quality, because obviously a larger corporate has less interest in sort of the community benefits. So the way we are addressing that at Earthly is that we don't just direct finance to already existing projects on the spot market, but we also engage with origination and advisory to projects. And actually, you can see in the screen I'm sharing, this is a piece of work that Earthly did for a project developer, a Mexican project developer that had an early stage project in Mexico, and they wanted to understand how their project, whether the project was on track to become a high quality project. And so we did what we call a gap analysis for them, which is an assessment of the score that a project gets according to our framework, but also what are the weaker and the strongest points. And here you can say that the project really performed well on carbon, because everyone is looking at carbon, but say we found some quite severe gaps in the biodiversity and social. And so the way we address this is twofold. Firstly, as you can see in the next slide, we gave them some overall recommendations for, I mentioned there's 106 indicators of quality. And here you can say, for instance, on the left, this is the additionality section, the carbon additionality. It's broken down into different indicators, and each of them is scored, and we highlight the gaps and some recommendations to fill those gaps in case the score is not optimal. So this is one way in which we help project developers, and you can see there's several pages of this analysis for both carbon, social, and biodiversity. And another way in which we help these companies is that once they've understood what quality means in the VCM context, we direct finance to those early stage projects in what we call origination. So if you're interested in that sort of relationship, regardless of whether you are an investor looking for early stage projects, or if you are a developer or landowner looking to develop a project and receive early stage finance, Earthly also operates in that space. I'm looking at the last question, if we can answer them in 1 minute. Cosette Myberg is asking whether projects which were initially reliant on donor funding can switch to carbon credits in case their donor funding comes up. And I think both Rishi and I met several projects of this kind, and it's always tricky to understand if the donor funding was withdrawn because they thought that carbon finance would come through, in which case the additionality is very weak, or if there are independent sources of withdrawal of donor funding, say a right-wing government versus a left-wing government, or some other international sort of flows which objectively prevent donors from donating to a project, in which case, yes, you can then apply for carbon credit finance to keep supporting the project. So I think we have reached the end of our 12th Project Earthly webinar. And I wanted to thank all our panelists today. It was a really interesting conversation. And if anyone from the audience has any other questions, please do not hesitate to contact hello@earthly.org. We will both answer your questions ourselves or direct them to the panelists you would like to reach. So thank you very much for attending, and see you in the next webinar.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.